at least for those here with me physically, why don't you raise your hand if you're currently a student at all in graduate school, MFA, undergrad, anything, any students here? Great. Why don't you raise your hand if you have completed a research project already that required you to go to special collections or a library to view materials? Great. Oh, yes. Okay. And Allison, would you mind? I would like to direct that question also to the audience. And so maybe people on Zoom can raise their hand and someone can kind of give me a sense of how many people in my virtual audience feel like they have already completed a research project that made them visit special collections or library. Okay, so stay tuned for that. But it seems like at least physically, it tells me who's raised their hand. Some people, it pops up on the screen, guys. Okay, great. I'm learning how this hybrid thing works. But a number of people are raising their hand and I'm getting notified. Love this. Everybody here can also see how many people are raising their hand. This is great. Okay, so it seems like we do have a mix of experienced researchers and people still interested and continuing to learn more, which is exactly the audience that I was hoping to have today. So thank you all for coming, and thank you to Center for Book Arts for having me and putting on this amazing exhibition. For those in the physical space, I hope you have a chance to see it. For those tuning in virtually, Saturday is the last day, so I hope you'll come before then if you haven't already. This is the closing event for the exhibition. This is the closing event for the exhibition. So I was thinking a lot. Camila already gave a little synopsis of what the exhibition is about, but it revisits the early history of artist books and it focuses on the intertwined legacies. You're over here, so I'll look over here. Legacies of book art centers across the US, whose primary goal has been to teach the craft practices of book arts, and other institutions focused on distribution and collecting. Sorry, this looks like we're doing this in live real time. This is somebody else's notes on the top of my notes. So that explains why it didn't look like what I had prepared. So we're gonna restart that. But as Camilo said, this is what the exhibition's about, and I'll just repeat it briefly. This is the closing event, and the premise of the exhibition is to reconsider the relationship between craft and conceptual practices in the early history of artist books. And in doing so, rethink who and what gets to be part of this history. Really, this exhibition premise grew organically out of my own interest in institutional histories and in archives, and how both archives and institutions tell stories. So obviously, when curating an exhibition of objects, of artworks, the works themselves take priority over all of the research you did. So when you put the exhibition together, sometimes it feels like people can't really see what the research was. I hope the arrangement of the artist books in the gallery does demonstrate these connections between craft and conceptual art. But when thinking about what I should do for this closing event, I kept coming back to really what for me was the excitement of this project. It was the year-long research that I did into the institutions that shaped this field. Again and again, people have asked me how I found and selected these works. And truthfully, it all emerged from the connections I found between these places and people involved. But it was also driven by the people I couldn't find, and the objects I couldn't see, and the people I couldn't talk to. We pressed this bottom button for next, okay. I've spoken before in other presentations about artists in this exhibition who have prematurely passed away, many of which from AIDS-related illnesses, but others recently. So it felt that if only I could have started this project a year sooner, I could have spoken to them for my research. This slide shows the work of Reginald Walker, who died from AIDS-related illness without much left to trace his career and work. So much so that I'm not even exactly sure the year he died, and I'm in the process of continuing to research his work to confirm. His archive has ended up at New York Public Library, and I hope continue looking into his work there. And here in this slide, you can see some of the materials I was able to view in his archive and how I take pictures and how I kind of make PDFs of research documents, but also take photos that show the header and page heading in the file organization so that when I want to request these materials later, I know exactly where they came from. Barton Benish, on the other hand, he also passed away from an AIDS-related illness, but at the age of 69 in 2012. And he left behind a huge archive and a successful career, but he does largely remain unknown outside of the book arts. And sometimes even within it, his work hasn't been shown very much recently in the context of conceptual art exhibitions. These are some other images you can see of ephemera that I found in the archives as well. Again, digitized so that I can know where they came from and look back at this as a reference later. You'll also notice a few of the names in here of galleries and institutions that pop up throughout my research, and I mention frequently in my exhibition catalog essay and in the archival sections of the exhibition catalog. John Eric Broadus, who died of AIDS-related illness as well in 1990, he actually died the same year this book, which is included in the exhibition, was made. And this is the exhibition catalog he produced for Center for Book Arts exhibition. That's also considered an artist book. And he died during the process of working on this exhibition. And Louise Odes Nederland. This is the work that's currently on view in the exhibition, and the work itself is about the passing of time and death. And she actually passed away in a month before the exhibition opened. And it's not just artists. Tony Zwicker, who was a prominent dealer and gallerist who promoted artist books, specifically unique artist books and craft-based artist books. You can see this is her obituary from Umbrella. There's a photo of her on the right from Sir Rodney Sir's archive, and her papers are located at SAIC's, the School of the Art Institute of Chicago's archives. And let me go to this next one. Norman Culp. His papers are in the Archives of American Art, and here you can see one of my research photos of one of his works. He was actually the curator of exhibitions at CBA from 1980 to 1983, and he was also a conceptual artist, and many of his exhibitions at CBA exemplify the merging of craft and conceptual art that I discuss in this exhibition and that I go into more detail about in the catalog. You can see also, this is a little slide of his work, a conceptual art piece, a mail art piece that he did at the Getty. So these are my research photos from that, where I list the box and folder number again so that I can find these things later when I'm wanting to reference them. And then Jackie Apple, who in addition to being an important performance artist, was also involved for many years with Franklin Furnace as a curator who championed unique artist books and curated a number of shows relevant to my research, including a solo show of Jackie Holmes's work. And for those of you who may have tuned in to previous presentations of mine, I've talked a lot about Jackie Holmes, and she will make an appearance in this presentation as well. Jackie Apple, the two Jackies, Jackie Apple also curated notebook scripts and scores at Franklin Furnace and an exhibition of Stella Watkins' work, which is also often unique book art object work. When I finally felt ready in my research to reach out to her, to Jackie Apple, I learned she died in June, the summer before my exhibition was to open. So why am I starting my research workshop with a sort of sad memoriam to all the artists and research figures I tried to reach out to that I couldn't reach out to during my process? I start with this because research into this period, particularly the 1970s and 80s, a period of great and amazing experimentation in the arts, and for so many, the birth of artist books as we know them today, is urgent. I think for many people entering criticism, thinking about art history, curating, etc., the draw is really to living artists, to contemporary work, to what's happening now. And archives can seem kind of sleepy, past, over, irrelevant even. But as I hope to show today, archives are actually where people and legacies go to live, but only if we use them. So throughout this event tonight, I hope you keep in mind two things. Archive and survive, which I borrow from Division Leap, and archives are not neutral, which I took a photo of this tote bag at an art fair I went to and I don't know whose tote bag it is, but if you made this, let me know. They're both two kind of catchy slogans for the urgent issues at the center of this workshop and why I'm focusing this event on talking about how, where, and why I researched and how, where, and why you can too. So I kind of want to keep this flexible. I have a presentation prepared, but if at any point you want to jump in with questions, please feel free. Somebody will tell me if people are asking questions on Zoom. And if you are here physically, just feel free to raise your hand. I sent out a research packet of materials in advance, and that is kind of less a specific rubric of what we're going to talk about today and a bit more so that you can see the kinds of materials I'm working with and see what kinds of information they have. And I'll show you what I got out of them, but I'm also curious to know what you would get out of them. What do you see in them that sparks interest? What would you want to research further and look into more? I thought the best event for us to close then would be to show and share with others how I did this nitty-gritty process of finding, organizing, researching, and repeating. How I ended up with a list of over 37 plus books, because there's 37 in the show, but obviously we had to request many more loans than we actually got and were granted. And finally, a history in the exhibition catalog that focuses on 7 specific institutions across the US. So I opened the physical exhibition here at CBA with some snippets of this research because I wanted the objects in the gallery to actually really speak for themselves and not have too many didactic texts around them and explanations. I included this timeline at the bottom, so that's what these little slips of paper that you see at the bottom are, to give kind of a bird's eye view of the period in time the exhibition covers and what other institutions and publishers were active during the years of the books that are included in the exhibition. For this specific exhibition, it's selected, but it grew out of something I started years ago as I began getting deeper into researching artist books. So I hope you all can read it pretty clearly. This is a little secret screenshot of my own personal Excel doc where I track the history of things and dates and publications. This is how I maintain my research. I started running into so many exhibitions and catalogs. And as I did, it was sort of easy to lose track of who did what first, who used what terms, and when. So I encourage anyone starting a similar historical research project to build out a system for tracking timelines and research to start at the start, because it's only going to keep ballooning and expanding, and it can continue to grow as your project does if you start with the system as you begin your research. Most of the show your work research for this exhibition actually, or show my work for this exhibition actually comes through in the catalog, more so than the gallery space. So as a researcher, I really wanted to make the exhibition catalog something people could use. I thought about the problems I would run into trying to track down sources and artworks in my own research, and I wanted to try to aid future researchers in that process. So in the materials I sent out ahead of time, I specifically focused on sharing checklists because that's such an essential part of trying to find works. But if you'll notice, for example, the Moore College of Art checklist that I sent out doesn't consistently list editions for the books. So sometimes it's unclear whether or not the work is a unique work or not, how to find it. It does brilliantly list the collectors, including many private collectors by name. So I encourage you to flip through that. And it's really fun to also consider who was collecting these works at the time and who was lending them to exhibitions. For example, Lucy Lepard appears as a lender for many of the works on there, as well as some well-known institutions and other big collectors in the field. So for this catalog, for my catalog, I wanted to make sure that the collection numbers were included whenever possible. I don't know, people who are seeing here, it might be a little fuzzy, but the catalog is available. So maybe we can pass that around and you'd be able to see that the sections I've highlighted are actually the collection numbers for CBA's collection or SF MoMA's collection, any public collection. So that way, if after the exhibition is over, researchers want to go and find these books, they can look them up by their call numbers. This was of something I was really passionate about, but was actually quite challenging to accommodate in the design of the book. So there's reasons why not all this information is always present, but it's great when we can make it present. Here you can see in the archival section of the catalog where I've reproduced certain interviews. Another reason that I started by talking about a lot of the artists who I was not able to speak to personally, and a lot of the figures in the field, particularly Jackie Apple and Norman Culp, is because when I was putting together the catalog, I was thinking about how we could incorporate these voices if I couldn't speak to them as primary source material. So here in this page, you can see I've reproduced an interview with Norman Culp. And one thing to keep in mind is that these different primary sources that we rely on, we can include them as ways to fill in the gaps in the history. Often interviews from this time period were published in smaller periodicals and newsletters, like some of the materials I sent to you in advance and I'm passing around here in the space, that have since been forgotten or not indexed by library catalogs. So when doing this research, I'm often thinking about how accessible these materials are to researchers who can't physically visit this institution. For example, Umbrella Magazine has been fully digitized online, but and has the Flu actually, which is Franklin Furness's magazine. But Center for Book Art's own newsletter is only physically located here in their archives. So I really prioritize publishing research materials that were not already digitized so that future researchers could read these primary source materials. Another great resource is all the conferences and symposiums that went on at the time. There's still so much research to be done into these actually, and it's a really exciting thing to look into if anybody here wants to pick up on any of this. Here's an excerpt from a CBA newsletter where I actually read a summary of a conference that Visual Studies Workshop held in 1979. This conference has largely been unresearched since. So I actually reached out to Visual Studies Workshop in Rochester, and they were able to share some of the ephemera from the conference, which was actually recorded. And some of the recordings have since been uploaded digitally. And so luckily, Jackie Apple's talk, I don't know if this is clear enough for you to read, but her talk is on book and intermedia art. And it, based on this summary that I read in CBA's newsletter, it really focused on unique artist books. So I was super eager to hear what this curator at the kind of largely performance-oriented experimental art space, Franklin Furness, had to say about unique artist books. So I actually have a little bit of the audio recording here so we can listen to Jackie Apple for a few minutes.
Jackie Apple from Franklin Furness.
Thank you. I'm going to talk to you about the exhibition program of Franklin Furness and the kind of books that we've been showing there for the past 3 years. These are all one-of-a-kind books, and the program is really dedicated to showing work which extends the definition of what a book is, and it's also work that is very often not shown in commercial galleries because commercial gallery sometimes doesn't understand it. They don't know what to do with something that's called book. The first group of books are books that are also sculptural objects. And many of them are also involved with uses of text. And this use of text is very different than a lot of the work that we've been looking at for the past few days. In printed books, much of the text is handwritten and it's often obliterated in some way or inaccessible.
So she goes on to give a few more overviews of the kinds of books that Franklin Furness is interested in, but it's primarily a slide talk. So while I was really hoping to be able to reprint an excerpt of her talk, it really wouldn't have worked without the images. So in some cases, it's best to just use the archival materials you're able to find for your own edification and not necessarily republish them. Context is really important, but I did quote her in my essay and cite this. And as I said, Visual Studies Workshop has this huge archive of recorded materials from this talk, proposals, and it's still not really been worked on. So if anybody wants to go up to Rochester and look into it, I'm sure they'd be happy to have you. And I'm really excited to look into it further because it's certainly one of the earliest conferences of the kind. It was held in 1979. So it was really exciting to get to hear some of these voices, since unfortunately I wasn't able to talk to Jackie about her own curatorial vision for the exhibitions at Franklin Furnace.
Jackie Apple.
Oop, nope, we're playing again.
Jackie Apple.
Okay, next slide. MCBA, also Minnesota Center for Book Arts, also hosted a conference and published the text as a book, which I did excerpt in the introduction of my catalog. So here you can see a piece of ephemera announcing the conference that I reproduced. And on the left, an excerpt of the introduction to the book, which served to contextualize what the talks were at the conference. And if you're interested, I give the information about the book and you can look into it and check it out yourself and read all the summaries of the papers. Alison Knowles spoke, Johanna Drucker spoke, a number of other people in the book arts fields. So these conferences were a really amazing primary resource that I was able to look into to hear these voices that I couldn't hear otherwise. And of course, Center for Book Arts held a conference in 1990, which was heavily documented and included a traveling exhibition. So I'm passing around one of the materials you have here. If you're in the physical space, is the conference book. If you're watching virtually, I'm including the table of contents for you here. And you should definitely come to CBA and look at the conference summary here. So CBA actually didn't transcribe the conference, but commissioned a conference summary. So they are written by a specific company they hired to attend all the sessions and summarize what they were. So they're not verbatim quotes per se, but I was pretty pleased being able to see the range of material, the range of topics, and read at least the summaries. This included talks by Tony Zwicker, who I mentioned, Mindy Dubansky, whose work is in the show, Martha Wilson, Kevin Osborne, Betty Bright. These are all figures who were really very popular during that time, doing important work on book art and trying to define the field. So it was really exciting to see all these voices compiled together. And again, this isn't really located. There are some copies I saw that are in a few libraries, but for the most part, it's primarily located here on site at Center for Book Arts. So I encourage you to come and check out the archival materials here. And then here you can see I actually decided to republish Tony Zwicker's summary remarks from the conference in the catalog, along with a poster that shows the catalog, or shows the list of attendees and participants and their topics in the catalog, so that people reading could get a sense. And as I said earlier, Zwicker was such a seminal figure during this period. She collected and dealt the work of Reginald Walker, as well as a few other artists in the show. So she was a great way to connect to some of the other voices that I couldn't speak to. And it was great to be able to include her voice sort of in the exhibition catalog as well. So Center for Book Arts, founded in 1974, as I've mentioned already, I did a lot of primary research here at Center for Book Arts archives. And I thought I would show you some of the fun little tidbits I found. So here are some photos that I found in the archives from various open houses. Here's one of the opening spreads from their first book art magazine. And then here's kind of how I keep track of all this research. So as I showed you my little Excel spreadsheet, here's kind of what I do when I'm trying to plan my research visits to archives. As you can see on the left, I have many of these different research lists. And on the right, here's a glimpse into the one for Center for Book Arts specifically. You can see the exhibitions I want to look into, the call numbers for the exhibition catalogs, which also appear in the catalog when I reference them, my own catalog, links to the exhibition pages. And then after I do the visit, I'll take notes about the exhibition and the artist that I want to look into further. So this is the system that I use, but again, this is just to show you my research methods. I'm hoping that this will inspire all of you to come up with a system that works for you for doing this kind of research. But I would say some of the most important things in terms of doing archival research that's going to cover a large period of time is to really make lists, be specific, come up with an organization system, because the worst thing is to do research visits and then not be able to find or locate your research again and have to go back to the institution because sometimes you can't. So here are some of the fun things I saw in Center for Book Arts archives, just to show you. This is one of their early newsletters where they're describing their mission and what's so exciting about being part of Center for Book Arts. On the right here, this is so fun. This is a postcard that Salo had sent to Norman Culp. So I mentioned Culp earlier. Again, when you're doing this research, what I'm really looking for is names that pop up again and again. Who are the figures who are connecting people and connecting books and connecting artists and connecting institutions and connecting craft and conceptual art? And Culp was really one of those figures for me. And it was through this archival research, I'd never heard of him really before, that I started to figure out that he was really a great nexus in those early 80s periods, bringing so many artists to Center for Book Arts. So it was cool to get to see this postcard from Solowitz saying he wanted to be in the show. And fun fact, Culp actually turned down his book because it didn't quite fit the premise of the exhibition. So it's good. It's really amazing to get to see how these people were interacting and how these exhibitions were shaped. And then here's some other fun things, a letter to founder Richard Minsky from Ray Johnson saying that he wants to host a Spam Radio Club event. And you can see Johnson's famous bunny figure and signature at the bottom and his very odd incoherent typography structure that's hard to read. And in the exhibition catalog, I reproduced some ephemera from announcing that Spam Radio Club event. So I'm showing you something that isn't in the catalog so you can get excited about what other treasures may be in the archives that you haven't seen. And then on the right is an announcement for Barton Benish's exhibition at CBA, one of the earliest exhibitions. I hope it's clear enough for you to see here in person. And as I mentioned earlier, Benish was one of the artists I got really excited about in my research, who unfortunately passed away, but did leave behind a lot of archival materials that I've been digging into. Yes. Yes. Exactly. The question from the audience was, isn't his whole apartment moved to a museum? And yes, he famously did. I'll go back. He famously did bequeath his whole apartment as an art installation after he died. And he was a collector, a real collector. So he had many odds and ends of ephemera and relics and things that he actually used in his artwork, but also just collected. And so there's a catalog that you can look into about that I believe I have cited in the exhibition bibliography if you want to look into it further. CBA has a copy, but it's also in a number of other libraries about this. Did you have another question? Okay, yeah, so he's a great example of someone who is thinking about his archive and his legacy, but unfortunately it's very sad why he had to, because he became HIV positive during the AIDS epidemic and all of his friends started dying. He thought, well, what's going to happen to my legacy and my materials and my art if I don't think about this? So again, that's kind of why I started with my little mantra, archive and survive, but only if people use it. So it's up to us to look into these materials that people have left behind for us. Feel free at any time to ask any other questions here. If anybody on Zoom is asking questions, let me know. If anything I'm showing you is sparking you to think, oh, I've seen something like that in my own research, or I want to know more about that postcard you just showed, feel free to chime in. But another important date and event that I included on the timeline at the beginning of the exhibition is 1973, the Artists Book Show at Moore College of Art. And I've included in the research packet the checklist, which I know is very long, for this exhibition, because it was actually amazing to get to read the full checklist. First of all, this catalog is extremely rare and hard to find. And I was originally starting this research during high COVID times when many of the libraries were closed. So it was really challenging to get access to some of these rare exhibition catalogs. So I think really spending time at the beginning of your research to develop clear research lists for what libraries and institutions have what publications will definitely save you time later in your research process. So knowing that, for example, I viewed this book at the Watson, knowing what else the Watson has around this kind of material so that I can try to batch my research visits together, see as much as I can at once is really helpful. And knowing that if anything goes wrong and I can't see a certain book at a certain library, where are my backup locations to see it? So this exhibition was actually the primary starting point for my own research, because it's an exhibition cited by so many as the first use of the title artist book for an exhibition. So I wanted to know, how were they defining artist book? So I don't know if you've had enough time to peruse the checklist in advance of this, or if I emailed it to you in advance, or today here if you just looked at it for the first time. But I'm curious to hear some of your thoughts about looking through it and flipping through it, if anybody wants to contribute. The other things in the catalog I was looking at, of course, were to read the essays, but really I wanted to see who was included in the show, what was the edition size of the works, what names were familiar, what names were unfamiliar, especially because this is cited by so many as the beginning. So what was there in the beginning? Did anybody see anything that they want to mention, or was anybody surprised about anything that they saw? I don't know if I'm getting any Zoom comments or any in-person comments. Did you get a chance? The checklist is right there. I don't know if everyone got a chance. No pressure, but it's long, but I think that's why I was really interested in it, to know that such a breadth of material was included was really surprising to me. Really, the checklist is like 50 pages. I mean, that's crazy to think. This was one of the first shows to really spotlight this and use the term artist books, and it's 50 pages long. That is very, very expansive and includes a wide umbrella of things under that term. Okay, well, I'll tell you what jumped out at me. One of the things that I focused on was names that I recognized from other artist book things that I didn't think would necessarily overlap. For example, Ellen Lanyon. I saw Ellen Lanyon was included in this show, and as you can see, the caption here says, a unique book which is drawn, painted, and collaged, and then a second book that's just printed in an edition of 12. So these are pretty small edition and unique works, and I thought that was really interesting because I actually recognized Ellen Lanyon's name because she was one of the first artists ever published by Printed Matter, right? And so we think of Printed Matter books as being larger edition sizes so that they can be distributed by mail. And so here was Ellen Lanyon, an artist who was published, one of the first artists ever published by Printed Matter in their first grouping of artist books. And also she was making unique artist books at the same time and included in this iconic show. So I thought this was a really interesting connection to make. And this work, Transformations, is actually included in my exhibition, Craft Conceptual Art. And I tried to think of ways to show these connections in other places in the catalog. So for example, in the exhibition catalog, I reproduced this spread from the Flu magazine, Franklin Furness's magazine, which we're passing around here in person. And I think I sent to you online. And so here you can see that she also, Ellen Lanyon, kind of contributed an artist spread to this publication that, again, is alongside a number of artists that are considered much more conceptual artists, like Nancy Sparrow. And this issue also had a lengthy discussion with Don Russell, who is one of the co-organizers of the Visual Studies Workshop Conference I mentioned from 1979. So it was super fun to look at these materials and try to find these connections, which I think of as little breadcrumbs. So when you're going through the archives, you're looking for breadcrumbs and you're seeing what breadcrumbs will lead you to what other breadcrumbs. And in the end, hopefully all the crumbs add up to a cake or something with a great exhibition or great project. I don't really know if that metaphor works, but I'm going to go with it. So here you can see, this is kind of how I was trying to show these connections in other ways in the catalog. And then here you can see some of my fun research photos that I take when I'm doing special collections visits. So for example, here's Ellen Lanyon book that I viewed at New York Public Library. And I took these weird photos so that I could see how accordion it was. I could see how the materials were. And I could see the actual transformation of the visuals. And I also am always careful to make sure I capture any date or publication details. So here you can see I have the page that lists the copyright and the publication info, which is really helpful when present on a book. And behind it, you can see my little WorldCat screenshot where I show you that I was looking to see all the different places I could view the book so that I would know if anything came up, how to find it. And so one thing to think about during this research process is what kind of research photos you would take and what you would want to capture about a book that would not just be relevant to you, but also thinking about who else might need these research photos. So for example, I commissioned essays for this catalog as well. And I had to keep in mind that people would be writing about these works who may not have a chance to ever view them physically, which is a really big issue in artist books research to begin with. It's just how hard it is to document artist books and write about works you haven't seen physically. So I'm just jumping back to show you a little bit more ephemera from printed matter and the other kinds of things they were publishing at the time. So, and distributing at the time, so you can get a context for how Ellen Lanyon would see it in this kind of moment. And also to emphasize that another institution that I mentioned in the timeline is 1976, when printed matter was founded. And I spent a lot of time in their archives as well. And I used these mailers, their announcements and kind of mailer catalogs, similar to the checklist, trying to find overlap between what was being exhibited and who was being distributed, and trying to find these surprising connections like the ones I've just mentioned to you. Here you can see this is one of the earliest printed matter little catalogs. It might be the first, and it includes this image here for Susan King's work, which is actually in the exhibition here. And I was really excited to see this nice little letterpress, partially letterpress printed book included here. And this was the first place I discovered Susan King's work and decided to look into it further. And I ended up including it in the exhibition. And here's my research video of it. And so while I show you this video, I really want you to think about what you would want to document about a book when you potentially only have one chance to see it. Part of that is to know if you're going to get to see it again. So familiarize yourself with the institutions at your disposal in your research home base and what the rules and restrictions might be for viewing materials there. Do you need an appointment? How far in advance do you need to request materials? How often will new materials be pulled for you? So those are some things to keep in mind. So I made this video, and then I actually was able to, I don't know, I'll let you see the whole thing. I actually was able to view it again, a different copy of it. So this is at the Watson at the Met. So I knew I could come back. The Watson, I really like doing research there in special collections because they will pull things for you same day, which is really great, and you don't need an appointment. So if you're based in New York, like I am right now, I really recommend you get library cards to all the institutions. So MoMA, Watson, NYPL, the Frick, all of them offer the opportunities for you to view special collections materials with varying levels of access. And then, so I did get to see this work again. And this is the actual copy that's in the exhibition. And this is from Otis, which is Millard Sheets Library, is at Otis College of Art and Design. And so what I was thinking about here was less documenting the whole work, but documenting what would be relevant for deciding if this was actually the copy we were going to request for loan. So here in this video, you can see the difference. This work has actually been laminated because Otis's library collection is circulating. So students can look at these books and check them out and use them. I'm actually not sure if they can check them out. Maybe fact check me on that. But they're copies for use. So they have these library stickers on them, and they've been laminated, which now is shocking, right? But this was one of the earliest established collections of artist books in the early 70s. So there weren't the kinds of things that we were thinking about now about the preciousness of these objects. They were for use. So it was exciting to get some loans from Otis from such an important historical collection, but it was also important to document what would be different about these works versus other copies of the books that I've seen. Okay. So another fun thing I found in Printed Matter's archives, which I wasn't expecting to find, were these two pieces of ephemera. So when you're doing research, obviously you go in with research questions, things you're looking for. At the time, I was looking for what books are being distributed by Printed Matter that kind of don't fit the established idea in my head of what kinds of books Printed Matter distributes. And while you're doing that kind of research, it's really important to be open to discoveries and things that are not part of your research plan and what they may offer to you in your exhibition premise or your research premise. In this case, this is ephemera I found documenting a collaboration, an exhibition between Printed Matter and an organization called the Writer Center. located in Maryland outside of DC. And I actually had never heard of this organization. And I saw this list of books. And at this time, I was already kind of deeper into my research. Oh, it's verifying OneDrive. Let's make that go away. I was already deeper into my research. So I already had some artists in mind, some names in mind. I'd been doing research at Center for Book Arts. So I was familiar with what was in their collection. And the big pings in my mind were, okay, this is an organization I haven't heard of, but the people that are listed on here as participating in this conference include Clive Philpott, Kevin Osborne, two figures that I was already familiar with. Howard, it says discussion moderated by Howard Fox, curator of exhibitions at the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden. So these are all people whose names were relevant to me at the time already. And so I decided to look further into this exhibition. And I realized later that almost all the works on this checklist here have been acquired by Center for Book Arts now. So this is a great nexus of this organization, the Writer Center, Center for Book Arts, and Printed Matter. So I ended up looking more into the Writer Center and getting in touch with the founders of the print program there and learning more about their program, which really was targeted towards writers who wanted to learn how to make their own books using offset printed technologies. And Kevin Osborne was also very heavily involved with Visual Studies Workshop. So it's these kinds of connections where all these people and places end up. Oh, we do have a question. Yes.
Yeah, just before you move on to something else. The question is, any lessons about photographic books, especially the artists themselves, for example, copyright content? It's fine.
Yes. I'm going to show you more pictures and more videos. So 100%. I think really the thing to think about that I've found is definitely the spine, but also I do a weird thing where I always have a picture with my hand next to the book because the scale of a book is really important. And I always have a picture of the front, back, spine, open, closed, and at least one video moving it. So not all artist books turn pages, but they all kind of move in some way. So I always try to capture that because those are the kinds of things that you won't necessarily remember later. So I'll show you more videos and we'll talk about that more later. You'll see some of the crazy ways that I've had to arrange books in special collections in order to get a good image of them. There are some really fun ones later. So anyway, this was just a great example of finding something that I didn't know and kind of pursuing it, a breadcrumb that led to learning more about this institution, which I ended up featuring as one of the 7 institutions that I focused on in my essay. And so another glimpse at that is when I was at the Walker Arts Center. They also did an exhibition in 1983. So again, I'm kind of following the timeline that I set at the beginning of the exhibition. And what was exciting about seeing this exhibition was to see how many works were loaned from Franklin Furnace. So here I'm showing you the checklist that includes work by Bruce Bacon, Baldessari, and Barton Benish, and the Benish works and the Bacon works are both loaned. There's several by each artist, and Laura Backlow that are all loaned from Franklin Furnace's archive. And actually going through many pages on the checklist, 25 to 50% of the exhibition was loaned by Franklin Furnace. So that was a really great connection to make between what was happening here in New York and knowing that these kind of collections and this energy was traveling to Minneapolis was a great connection to make between these works. And then staying with Minnesota Center for Book Arts. So the exhibition is actually going to travel to Minnesota Center for Book Arts as its final venue in August. So that was one thing I had in mind while I was doing my research, was wanting to make sure that I could have the exhibition cover the scope of the tour of the exhibition regionally. So I wanted it to incorporate some history from San Francisco, where it will go next, and some history from Minneapolis, where it will go last. So again, similar to Center for Book Arts, MCBA published newsletter that hasn't really been indexed in library catalogs. So they shipped me a big binder of all their newsletters because they haven't even been digitized. And so I flipped through this huge binder of newsletters manually. And so I was learning from the newsletters about the exhibitions program, the classes they were doing. And I read a little bit about one of their earliest shows, Midwest Contemporary Book Art. And so I got the checklist for that. And this was another great fun connection to see Philip Gallo, who does a lot of typesetting and is known for that, also experimenting with other kinds of concrete poetry and more experimental works. And when the show goes to Minneapolis, it will include one of his works there, a kind of Fluxus-inspired piece that includes a a plastic ant and buttons and other fun things. It's also documented in the catalog, though it's not on view here right now. So again, looking for these connections, spending time looking at checklists is really what I actually did for most of my research. And then to get to the audience question about book viewing, here you can see this work is in the exhibition. So in addition to being able to do research in New York, I also went out to the Getty in LA and spent a lot of time with their incredible, extensive collection of artist books. But I didn't know, that's a good example of going to an institution and not really knowing if you're going to be able to go back there again. So thinking about documentation in that case is really important, knowing that you may not be able to see things again. So this work, A Book of Folds by Solowit, is included in the show. And I had actually seen images of it before in some of the Getty's publications, but one thing that they never showed was the back, which actually says for Franklin Furnace. So this image has never been published. So I had no idea it even said this and that Solowit had even made this book for Franklin Furnace. So another amazing connection to find. And it's a unique work, which is extremely rare for Solowit to have made a unique artist book. So I made this nice little video of me turning the pages so you can see the folds, which create lines in the book, similar to how he's done his instructional line pieces and wall drawings and artist books. You can see the twine that binds the book, just tied simply through. So this is me in the archive, just holding my phone up and taking these videos. It is extremely time consuming, but it's definitely worth it because I didn't know if we'd really be able to get this book for loan, and we ended up being able to get it for here in New York. But now this video, I can share it with the researchers for the catalog who may or may not want to discuss this work, which is really great. So especially for unique works, as I mentioned, spine, front, back, any caption info that the book includes. And binding, you know, I think this video is really nice because you can really see how it's put together, the book. Yeah, great. Oh, don't play again. Yeah, I also got to see Alison Knowles' Bean Rolls, which is an amazing work and also very rare and hard to find. And I also do this fun thing where I take a picture of the box as well before I open it because it has their call number info, and it's a good reminder of where I saw the object and how it's stored. So I can keep that in mind when I'm thinking about shipping, loan requests. If it's in this enormous giant thing with 50 layers of foam, are we going to be able to ship that here? Those kinds of questions come up. And also I wanted to mention, as I said in my intro, I looked at many more books than I requested for loan. So this was one of them. And I just think it's great to give a sense of the breadth of research you do that doesn't actually get used in a very direct way, but is still an important process and part of the process. I'm wondering if anybody wants to share, after seeing all these books, right? I end up with hundreds of photos and videos, right? I'm wondering if anybody in the audience here on Zoom wants to share any of their systems for organizing or storing their research information and their research photos. I'm going to show you mine. Yes, we have somebody.
There's an interesting comment on Imagine archive generates artists.
I know. I mean, there have been a lot of efforts, and I'll show you some here, by certain institutions. Like the Getty is really in process of digitizing a lot of their collection and making it available. Primarily when you're on site, you can get the digitized images, but some of them are available when you're off site. And there are other institutions that are really trying to make an effort to do that, or to make videos and put them on Vimeo. But as someone who has made hundreds of these videos for my own personal use, not for distribution, don't anybody come after me. It's really time consuming, and especially to do them for, publication quality, even if it's internal archival use. We should donate money and find a funder who wants to support this to digitize collections of artist books. If you're out there, you should do that. Did anybody want to share their organization system at all? Okay, well, I feel very vulnerable. Oh, did you want?
I was thinking like in some image databases, there's like different tags.
Oh, yeah.
Like the tags for artist books, like
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so I don't know if people on Zoom can hear you, so I'll just repeat what you said. But it's an idea of using tagging systems for if it's unique or multiple or different bindings, so that you can search your research that way. I should do that. I don't do that. Did anybody else, IRL or virtual, want to add any thoughts about kind of organizing and indexing all this information as you're doing the research and all these images? Okay. All right, I'll reveal. Mine is not that exciting. I forgot that I planned a big reveal, but I forgot that I have one more slide to show you, which is another thing I saw from the Getty that actually didn't make it into my exhibition, but I wanted to point out this piece of ephemera from Anna Banana, who was a big San Francisco mail art icon. And it's addressed to Sass Colby. And for those of you who have seen the exhibition, you know that Sass Colby's work is included in it. So it's another fun connection. I didn't end up using any of Anna Banana's work, but I was really excited to see this connection between these artists. Okay, I think the next slide is my organization system. Yes, okay. So this is the crazy system that I use. So I organize, can you read it in person here? It's a little fuzzy, but hopefully you can read it. I organize it by institution first. So where did I see the materials? Which sometimes isn't as intuitive as I thought, but when I'm doing so many site visits, I find that it's easiest to just keep all the materials together that I saw in one place. So this also gives you a sense of how many different institutions I visited. So in this list, you can see Franklin Furnace, Getty, MCBA, MHS is Minnesota Historical Society. There's MoMA, there's New York Public Library, there's Otis, Print and Matter, San Francisco Center for the Book, SF MoMA, Visual Aids, Visual Studies Workshop, the Walker, the Watson, and then some of these institutions I didn't go to, but I was collecting ephemera from them digitally. The Women's Building in LA doesn't exist anymore, so I couldn't view them. And Writers Center, as I said, doesn't exist. The printing program there as it was doesn't exist anymore. So that was also kind of digital research. And you can, so these are primarily, great question, and I will elaborate on that. Most of them are JPEGs and MOV movie files, because these are not going to be publication quality regardless. So I'm not saving them as giant TIFFs. These are just my, as you can see, sometimes not so great iPhone photos. But the other thing that I do is if I know I'm going to be potentially sharing this information with outside researchers for my project, I'll also make PDFs of the books where I sequence all the images of each page of the book and make them into a PDF. Again, this isn't for wider distribution. This is just for my own research and selected other researchers who may be contributing to my project. So when I was inviting potential writers to write essays for my catalog, I was sharing selected research materials with them related to the topic that I was hoping they'd write about. And, you know, documenting artist books is so challenging. And writing about them based on just a more examples. Here's from CBA's archive. Writing about them based on just one or two photos is really challenging, especially from this time period. The kind of materials that are available from the catalogs, as I sent you guys, are often these little black and white thumbnails. So what I'm trying to capture is what researchers will need for their essays, for their scholarly research. And when I'm in the space, I'm thinking like, what are the details that I'm going to want to reference later when I'm writing about this work? What are the things that I'm not going to remember about this book? You know, so in a lot of cases it is capturing as many of the pages as I can, but sometimes it's really small, tiny details. I know I have another slide of it. I'm just checking to see if it comes next or not. These are the books. Oh yeah, these are the checklist PDFs I was telling you about. So you can see here that I have in this folder, which is called checklist, I've selected the works that actually did end up in the exhibition, and I've made specific PDFs and movies and added research materials here that I could then share with future contributors to the catalog, so that I knew they wouldn't be able to view all the books in as much detail as I had. So I wanted to try to give them as many resources to follow my footsteps and draw their own conclusions as possible. This is another video I made of one of the books in the show that's also very unique and very material. So again, thinking about what I wanted to capture about the work was, how this text appeared over the candy. This is Mindy Jubanski's work, by the way. How the text appeared over the candy, how fragile turning the pages was. This is actually the second video I made of the book. The first video I made of the book, which I'm not including, is the book just lying flat. And I started to open it and I realized, no, I actually need to put a little sandbag support under the book in order to properly flip through it. So there's a little trial and error here. And with this work, luckily, Mindy was able to provide us with a Word document of the text of the whole book. So then I had the whole text, and we've reproduced actually the text on the wall above the book. So I could share that with researchers who were thinking about writing about this book in their essay as well. And then here's actually a beautiful photo that was taken professionally of the work in the exhibition that I really love. I don't know whose nails those are, but that's perfect. Somebody with these sparkly nails. And then this photo really does show the binding and how these candy pages stack together really beautifully. I couldn't take so this isn't the quality of my research photos. When I'm in the archives, they don't look like this. But yeah, so as I was saying earlier, the challenge of researching artist books without great images and without great documentation was a huge part of this project. So partly why I took so many photos and videos and organized them so extensively was that even if I knew I wasn't going to include this book in this exhibition, this is the kind of quality that we were dealing with to begin with. So this is Lucas Samaris's book. Again, we're going back to the Moore College of Art exhibition catalog. And this photo, actually for the time, is incredible because you can really see the three-dimensionality of the object, but it's just one little black and white object. So it's not really super helpful if you're going to write an in-depth essay. And then here are the professional photos we got, which are amazing. But even in this, how would you write about this work? What's on the other pages? Are those things you've seen? Are they cutouts? Are they, does that page come out? Is there more text? What does the text say? What's that little thing lying in front of it? So these are amazing professional images, but the thing that you need from professional images is different than what you need as a researcher trying to write about a book and trying to understand it and think about bringing out specific components of it into your research. So these are the professional images. And then I'm going to show you some of my research images of the same book, which look crazy. So an art handler was flipping through this for me. And so you can see so many of these little pieces actually fold out and up, and that these texts actually open and are multi-layered. So I was trying to take photos that were close enough so that I could read these texts later, which is crazy. And there's so many texts. And also to show, for example, the cover is really beautifully stitched, which I couldn't tell at all before taking this detail photo. Pieces like totally fold out. And I also took the back. I didn't include here for you. I took a picture of the binding as well. And here you can see how deep these cutouts are and how they layer onto each other. So I'm really curious, what other people have done in the past for researching artist books, or what other things that you specifically would want to get out of looking at a book and being able to come back to it later. This is really the thing, is in the moment you think you're going to remember everything. You think you're going to remember all the amazing details of the work, but when you see hundreds of works, you're not going to remember. Let me tell you, you're not going to remember. So take the pictures, take the notes, and think about when you would want to write an essay, what's a piece of this book that you could illuminate for readers who will never get to see it? And in order to do that, how do you take those kinds of notes? Here's another example from the Moore College of Art show, Gordon Matta Clark's Walls paper book, which is in the exhibition now, had no photo. I had no idea what it was going to be. Here's our professional photo of it, looks really great. Here's my research video of it, which is kind of hilarious, but I wanted to try to show the different combinations of how the pages really function together, what it would look like. You can see people walking by me in the library, what it would look like with the different pages together. How was the binding? Like you can see it doesn't really stay open, which was something I was thinking about when we displayed it. How would it lie open? How would we show it in this way? And so I flipped through both sections. For this book, I decided that it wouldn't really make sense to have, it's not possible to take pictures of every single spread. but I was thinking more like of trying to capture what the book's feeling was. So how floppy it was and how colorful it was. And I also took, I wanted to make sure I could see that Buffalo Press and the date, because this was actually the more trade edition of a unique work that was originally showed at Moore. So then he republished it as this more trade edition. And then to get to the question about all the ways you try to capture binding and things, I mentioned I went to the Getty. So the Getty holds Barbara T. Smith's archives, and there's actually an exhibition of her work on view right now at the Getty. But I was really excited because she made 25 unique artist books that are called her Coffin book series. And so these are all unique. So this is the only place to see them. And I knew that this might be my only chance to get to see them. So alongside all these photos and videos, I also take extensive notes about the books as well. So things that I noticed that surprised me, things I would want to remember, besides what's just in the photos. Sometimes I'll transcribe some of the writing if it's hard to read or if it's especially interesting. This is also so that when I'm thinking back on my research, I'll know, okay, I saw that Barbara Smith book, and it said, I remember there was one that said this, which book was it? And instead of having to look through hundreds of images, I can just search my text document for the phrasing I'm looking for the color I'm looking for. And that is kind of a really helpful aid during my research process. And you can also see on the left some of the other research lists. And so you can see this is an installation view of the exhibition. On the far left, the pink book is Barbara Smith's coffin book that we have in the exhibition. You can see on the far right actually is the Susan King book I mentioned. You can see that library stamp, and that's the copy we got from Otis. And then this is the professional image of the Barbara Smith book that we got. And again, I'm showing the professional images alongside my research images just to emphasize that what you're looking for when you're doing research isn't the best professional quality image. It's about what you can see and what information you can get from the image that you'll be able to use later. So that's a great professional image, but here's another professional image of the works, different books that are installed at one of her shows that I got from her gallery. Again, thinking about how they're displayed was really helpful and being able to see these whole books like this. Then I mentioned the Getty is working to digitize their works. So these are what the digitizations look like. So this gives you specific information about the individual spreads, but you're missing a lot of information about the book as a whole. So then here is the front of one of the books. They often have these similar black covers with this silver X and a circle symbol. That was the symbol that was on all of them. And this is one of them that I'm looking at. And here's my video of it here. And you can see this spiral binding, and that they're actually, all the pages are individual Xerox sheets. Oh, this one has sound slipped into the plexi covers. So that was something that I really couldn't tell from those Getty images. And you couldn't tell from necessarily from the professional images. It makes it really challenging to deal with these materials when you're taking research photos. So that's something else that you come across, is that the lighting and the way these materials work can be hard to capture in these spaces. And they kind of do that on purpose because they don't want you to be able to take professional quality images that you can publish without their permission. But I flipped through this book and made this great video, and you can see now some of the images that are similar to one she included in the other books I showed you that are accordion books. But the really fun one I want to show you is, I do make sure to get the back thing. Yep. Okay. Is this one, which is one of the accordion books. I had to set this thing up on the table at the Getty, this huge thing. And then I was like standing on things trying to get photos of the whole thing. I mean, I imagine this is a crop photo, but in one of them, you can see people walking by staring at me in a glass. Their special collection space has a glass wall. So people on the other side of the library are looking at me while I have this whole thing set up here. And this one's really fun. I'm only showing you this image because the fun story about this one is, I don't know how familiar any of you are with Barbara Smith's work, but she rented a Xerox machine in the mid-60s after she was turned away by Gemini Workshop to make prints there. She rented this Xerox machine, she put it in her living room, and just started making prints. And what did she have to work with? Well, she had her body, she had her household objects. It was during the end of her marriage when she realized she was going to divorce her husband and become an artist. she was taking care of her kids. And so she was making prints and making dinner and picking our kids up from school. And so this series of work is some of my favorite. And so I'm really excited to have some in this show. But she did a number of really, at the time she was experimenting in the advent of performance art. She did a lot of performances with nudity and food and her body. And so her Xerox books were exploring the same thing. And this is a really interesting moment as a researcher, because I got to meet Barbara Smith and go to her studio and see her books. So it's kind of the opposite of what I talked about in the beginning. She is still alive, luckily, and I'm so grateful that I got to speak to her. But, you know, with living artists, there do come different challenges. For example, some of her more explicit books, she wasn't as comfortable with being shown anymore. She recognized how important they are to feminist history, but, you know, at this time, it wasn't quite what she wanted to show. So I'm only showing you this one image that's slightly more censored because this is one of her more explicit books. But I was really excited about this book here and showing this photo because I don't know if you can tell, the back sides of these pages are all black. So it was almost like when you open it, you just see the black. And if you just flip through it traditional, you only see the black pages until you realize that the images you have to pull out and are on the underside. So it was a really, I thought, very interesting way of sort of censoring the book and playing with the idea that you're not supposed to look at this, that this is sort of explicit. I think we have a Zoom question.
Yeah, it's just kind of applicable, what you said, which is, could it be said that the best way to understand art's book, besides holding it through a cinematic experience, it's like photographer scans from justice to the.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I really do think that videos, that's why I do try to make videos as well when I'm doing research, are some of the best, obviously, if you can't actually hold the book, but there is so much about their movement that's important. And so it was just, I couldn't make a video. It was this giant thing that I was unfolding. And so this is kind of, there's a bunch of photos of me with this book, like in different ways, open on the table like this. So accordion books are sometimes really great for display because they offer the potential to see all the pages sometimes at once, which a lot of books you can't do that in an exhibition. But they're also really challenging when you're in a special collection space with limited table space and you're assigned one little section. So this was my really fun time with Barbara Smith's work. And then I mentioned earlier Sass Colby and spotting her name in the mail art. And again, coming back to the kinds of images I was working with. Sass Colby is also still alive. See, I wanted to end with some like fun artists who are still alive who I was able to talk to. So it wasn't all just kind of really sad remembrances, but Sass Colby is still alive, and I discovered her work here in CBA's exhibition catalogs. And again, I was working with these kind of black and white images that were kind of tricky and trying to track them down based on these little descriptions. And this is the work that's in the exhibition Life book, which is an amazing book that it's unique, and it includes photo transfer and stitching and fabric and fun pockets. So I did get to do a studio visit with Barbara with Sass, and this is her hand. And so I took a video to try to show the different components of the book so that I would remember all the little pockets and folds in it. So she unzipped some of the parts for me so I could make a little video. So those are the kinds of things that I'm thinking about when I'm looking at a work, is the kinds of things that you can't just capture in a photo like that great participant mentioned. But what I would want to reference later, what's smart and interesting about the work. And it's not always possible to take a picture of every page. So you do have to think about what are the ones that I know I'm going to want to focus on later. And here are some professional images that are really amazing, but then also some of my own little detail images from research. So you can see I wanted to really focus on capturing the Xerox transfer that maybe wasn't as visible. And then I mentioned earlier, Jackie Holmes. I don't know how many people here are watching also participated in CABC, but I gave a process while I was still very deep in my research at the time about my research process. And I mentioned Jackie Holmes. And this was an artist whose work kept popping up in CBA exhibitions, at Franklin Furnace, at the Studio Museum in Harlem, a few other really important institutions at the time. And I was really interested in her work, but the kinds of images I was seeing were just this, and I don't really know what this is, black and white. It's definitely handmade paper and it looks really beautiful, but I can't really tell much information from it. And I tried to find her. This is what the presentation I gave last time was about. One of the projects was trying to find her. And I ended the presentation by saying that I couldn't find her, but if anybody I knew anything about her, please let me know. Well, here's some of the information from Franklin Furnace that I had to go on some of the photos. Well, and then here's more Franklin Furnace. She was also making Xerox prints of her body at the same time, working in a photocopier shop and experimenting with mail art and handmade paper. So again, I got more and more excited the more I learned about her and learned about her kind of craft and conceptual art overlap. And this show was the one that was curated by Jackie Apple. So this was one of the reasons I had hoped to talk to Jackie Apple. Anyway, this is Jackie Holmes' book that's actually in the exhibition right now because she found me after I gave this presentation at CABC. So I thought this was kind of a fun anecdote to mention towards the end because research can feel like it's endless sometimes, but it can be really fruitful because sometimes you think you've hit a dead end and then a few months pass. This was months later. I gave the presentation and then months later, Jackie got in touch with me. So you never know what's going to come back. You never know how the research is going to become fruitful later on. And it's definitely one of the lessons I've learned through this that's been really exciting. And finding Jackie and being able to include her in the show was very exciting. And finding so many of these other so many of these other connections has also been really amazing. So for those who are not here in the space with us, I just wanted to end by showing some of these installation images of what this research became. And then I wanted to open it up to any thoughts that people had in the audience who are experienced researchers or starting to become researchers and who are thinking about, as we've been talking about, how to document these works and how to organize your research with perhaps metadata tags. If you've had a chance to, while I've been talking, look through some of the research materials I sent out, if there's anything from the checklist or those catalogs that really interested you, that you were excited about, that you'd want to share with the audience or talk to me about, I'd really love to hear from some of the participants that are joining us and what brought you here, what you're researching, and any questions you may have about my process or your own. But thank you all for joining and listening to me and going on this research journey with me. I hope if you haven't seen the exhibition that you're able to come, and definitely feel free to reach out to me if you have any research questions that you come up with later, or you want any tidbits on getting into archives and getting archival reproductions, things like that. I'm here. So thank you all. Does anybody want to, I don't know how to, if I stopped, oh yeah, Camilla.
In the process of your research, do you end up collecting some of the materials, camera, books, when you're able to do it?
Yeah.
And how does that process affect your production, your collection? Do you have like an ethical, posture towards that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Usually it depends on the kind of project I'm doing. In the case of this exhibition in particular, I actually did end up with some materials in my own possession, which was very unexpected. But it just ended up making the most sense. Sometimes I was trying to get loans of works or trying to consider certain books for inclusion, and they were relatively affordable books that were being sold at Printed Matter, for example. So sometimes I thought, okay, well, the easiest way to make sure that we can get this is I'll just buy it and then we'll have it and then we can figure this out later. But obviously that's not really feasible with the majority of the kinds of works, or sometimes some of the artists maintained their own archive of their books and were very generous and wanted to donate copies to me so that they could be in the exhibition, things like that. So ultimately what I ended up doing was taking those materials, and now most of them I've actually donated to Center for Book Arts so that they can now be part of Center for Book Arts archive now that I finished doing the research. So somebody generously gave me almost a complete run of Ampersand magazine, for example, which was a periodical coming out of the Bay Area. That's an artist book periodical. And so I was referencing that heavily in my research on the Bay Area, but it's not really helpful for me to keep a huge stack of ampersand magazines. And knowing that they're not digitized and they're hard to get online, I donated them to CBA so that they can be part of their archives and researchers can come view them here. So trying to pay it forward a little bit. But that's a good question, yeah. If I'm doing something more critical, sometimes you do have to be careful in terms of collecting the materials because you don't want to have sort of a bias as somebody who could benefit from, you know, the increased value of a work. But in this case, for this kind of historical exhibition, that wasn't really the case. I honestly can't afford many of these works. I wish I could. So any other questions or thoughts? Yeah.
I'm curious, when you interview artists, do you record?
I do record. Yeah, I definitely do record. I always ask for permission, but I always make audio recordings. I'm usually also taking notes, but it's really hard to take notes while someone's talking and to also be engaged. So I always make recordings. I usually ask them if I can take photos if I'm doing a studio visit for research, and usually they say yes. And then I always make it clear that this will just be my reference. And then if I'm ever going to quote anything, this is actually important. If I'm ever going to quote anything from a recorded interview like that, that's unofficial, I always send the quotes to the artist to approve, because sometimes people will say things, but they meant it to sound a little different, or, you know, so if it's not a published thing that they've formally done, I always check with them for their quotes. And especially for this kind of research, there was also a lot of email correspondence. And in a lot of cases, I also cited emails. And again, it's the same process of checking the quotes with anybody who I've corresponded with if I want to publish them. From Zoom. Oh, wild.
Paula, you are live.
Oh, okay. So my question, thanks, Karina.
Oh,
Megan.
hi, Paula.
Hi. My question was, I was just wondering how, like clearly a lot of collections loan to you, and you mentioned having to reach out to a lot more collections than what you had in the show. So I'm not a researcher, but like a maker of books. And I kind of wonder if, like, once they get into collections, if they stay in that, you know, cardboard archival box and ever see the light of day. And so I guess I was just wondering, like, how willing were most collections to loan to you? And then what about, like, do they stipulate these need to be in a vitrine or these can be out? And so since I'm in Minneapolis and not in New York, I can't see the show, but I'm wondering, like, can you
It's coming to Minneapolis, so you will see the show eventually if you want.
Nice, awesome. Well, I definitely will. But like, can the viewer like look through these books, or is it just to see open to the page that we're seeing them now, like in the Zoom?
Yeah. That's a really good question. And talking about the loan process and what happens to books and institutions is something I would happily talk to you about more, not live streamed over Zoom, because it's a really something I'm still learning a lot about. And there's a lot of pitfalls and struggles in the process, but there's a lot of amazing opportunities as well. So we did request a lot of books we didn't get. And I think the biggest thing to keep in mind with when a book enters an institution is what the mission of an institution is. So if it's about preservation, and they're always trying to balance preservation and use. So different institutions will draw that line at different places as to what they think is needed to preserve the book. And a lot of the issues really just come from funding. I actually was flipping through my notes while you were talking because I kind of went off script for the second half. And I had a little thing written at some point somewhere that was kind of my mission statement. The takeaway for this talk is that we should all donate money to archives and libraries and stipulate that it go to processing collections, because one of the biggest hurdles is just not having enough money and staff to process collections and to process these works. So if work and papers and archives are uncatalogued, then there's a lot of restrictions on who can use it and how it can be used. But we should just all donate so that everything can be processed and accessible, and so that researchers can use finding aids and find things. As for whether or not the books can be handled or not, that kind of also goes along with what different institutions stipulate. So here in this physical space, a number of the works can be handled. A number of them cannot be handled, but don't have to be in cases. And then there are a selection of them that cannot be handled and have to be in cases. And usually it's about the fragility of the work, as well as what the institution deems is necessary to preserve it. And so, yeah, that's kind of how it goes. So if you donate your work to an institution, or if an institution acquires your work, it will really just depend on what kind of general things they do to try to preserve that work when it travels.
Great, thank you.
Yes.
Oscar?
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Megan.
Hi.
Hi, I have a quick question. So what is the process behind making your exhibition a traveling one? Is this something that the institutions offer to you as an opportunity to continue this research, or is that something that you initiate, or maybe Center for Book Arts helps you initiate?
Yeah, in this case, Center for Book Arts was really a huge supporter and promoter of the traveling exhibitions. I think it's something that's kind of shifting in their mission. I don't want to speak for CBA somewhere. Karina's on here and maybe could explain it better than I can. But yeah, it was presented as an opportunity to me to potentially travel the exhibition to other book art centers. And so that's really what prompted my research to go beyond just New York. I'm based in New York, and I've been researching the institutions here for some time, but I really wasn't that familiar with the landscape in the Midwest or on the West Coast. So because I knew the show was going to travel there, that's why I traveled there to do research, to familiarize myself a bit more with what the book art and artist book landscape there was. But I think it really varies from institution to institution, how a show becomes a traveling show. I will say for artist books in particular and works on paper, traveling is very challenging because a lot of the works have restrictions in terms of light. And so they can't really be on view for more than a year because that's too much exposure and too much handling over time. So that's also something to keep in mind. While traveling is amazing to give more people the opportunity to see a show, it also means that sometimes you have to shift the checklist a little. So when my show travels, it's not going to have exactly the same works at every institution, partly because of these loan restrictions and partly because certain works just can't be exposed for that long. Oh, is my screen still? What happened to my screen? What do people see?
Sorry, Megan, that's my fault.
Oh, that's fine. I mean, it's nice to see to see everybody. I don't necessarily need to have it be on the installation view, but
Let's see here. I'm going to try to remove the spotlight so that we can
all see each other.
And I just thought that this might be a good opportunity for me to comment on the exhibition traveling thing that you brought up, unless you have something else that you want to.
No, it's all you.
Yeah, so I definitely am interested in Center for Book Arts traveling our exhibitions to multiple institutions, and not just to institutions which are already involved with the book arts. We're interested in, having exhibitions travel, especially to university museums and galleries, and also to independent galleries across the country and internationally. The biggest thing that gets in the way for us is funding, because as I know that in trying to travel this exhibition, shipping art is so expensive. So if you're interested in working with us to travel an exhibition, we're interested in learning more about how to fund that aspect of the show. Megan, this has been so interesting. I am honestly so grateful that we were able to work together on this exhibition. As you mentioned, the catalog really is an incredible resource. And so I encourage everyone on the video, if you don't have a copy yet, you should get one because they're going to sell out. We're almost sold out here at Center for Book Arts. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the exhibition travel to these other spaces and what it looks like in these different iterations. And as Megan, I know through all of your research, exhibitions change slightly as they go from location to location. So I think it will be interesting to see the documentation as your work evolves.
Yeah, I think if there are artists watching as well, one thing that I would also really encourage as part of this whole process of learning about research is also thinking about what can best serve you and your work to researchers. So any opportunity you have to make sure you also have copies of the professional images of your work, or making sure that images are being taken of your work in different exhibitions and installations, because so much of what happened during my process is, in the case of the artists who were still alive, who I was able to meet with, I was really dependent on what their record keeping was in a lot of ways in order to be able to tell their story. I opened this kind of talk by saying, archive and survive, but archives are not neutral. So we also have to think about whose stories aren't in archives. And so how you can kind of maintain your own archive and keep your own resources about your work, and think about where those resources will live someday, like Barton Benish donating his whole house to a museum. These are important things to think about when you want to make sure that your work does get researched in the future, as much as they are things that I'm considering as a researcher.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for coming. And Megan, thank you again for all the work you did on this exhibition, for the incredible research that you contributed to the history and legacy of Center for Book Arts and the whole book art community. And looking forward to what's next. All right, take care.